The next series is about grief. Grief that we experience when we lose someone very close to us. Now, before I go into what it is, how it works, what the effect of it is on not only our mind but also our bodies, and why it's so hard, terribly hard, to process grief, I would like to share with you my interaction with grief. I was 17 when I experienced the loss of somebody very close to me for the first time. It was my best friend who passed away. It was a very tragic hunting accident where his younger brother accidentally shot him with a shotgun in the chest. Still hard to talk about it. We were like brothers. We grew up together, we trained together, we did everything together. And from one moment to the next, it was gone. Now, at this stage of my life, I had already experienced quite a lot of trauma and hurt, and both physical and mental and psychological and emotional abuse from my dad. This was just another level. My young mind couldn't process it at all. I started going into this dark, existential space, asking what is the meaning of life? What reason and rhyme is there for me to do anything at all, if this is going to be the end result? Why the fuck am I alive if this is just going to be the end of it? Me pushing up daisies. So that was the first major experience. The second was when my grandmother passed away in 2007. This was a very different experience. I was living in Ireland at the moment, and I was very fortunate. The job I was doing at the moment there, I could actually go home for her passing. So I spent the last 6 weeks of her life every single day with her. I held her hand while she passed away. It was a very, very different experience. Those last few weeks, we spoke about her life and her regrets and whatever still there was that she wanted to do but never got to do. Her experience of life and being alive. Right, so this was, like I said, totally different than my very first experience. My third big experience was in 2012. Now, this one hit me like a brick. Very close friends, like a brother. I've known him since my teenage years. Every single time I went to South Africa, he was my first stop. He passed away in his sleep from a brain hemorrhage when he was 33. Got a message saying that he died. And just like that. It was horrible. Absolutely horrible. At this stage, I'd already been drinking for a couple of years. I was deep into being an alcoholic, and I think for a very brief moment, I actually tried to drink myself to death. I remember there was about a week where I would drink until I pass out, and then I would wake up and I would start drinking again until I pass out, and I would wake up and I would just do the same again. It was such a difficult time. Not even a month later, I got another phone call that one of my close friends in Ireland had committed suicide. And that was just the cherry on the cake. All right, I was a broken young man at this stage. I didn't know my left from my right. I didn't know forward, backwards, up, down. It was just a time that I really, really wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Then the most recent loss that I experienced was actually from a client and a very close friend who passed away from cancer not even 2 months ago. My experience with loss in the form of death, and this is really important that I'm not comparing this to your experience. When it comes to something as traumatic as loss and grief experienced through death, then we cannot compare. Each individual's experience is their experience with its own gravity and its own power. So I'm not comparing at all. All I'm doing is I'm sharing with you my personal experience, and then later on I will share with you some of my professional experience as well. Because a part of what I do is I help people to integrate and process grief and loss feelings and emotions when they lose people close to them. So this is my experience with grief in the form of loss. Now, initially what I found the most difficult during this whole process was my very first interaction, right, with death. When I was 17 and my friend passed away, I'd never really thought about, how is the future? What do I want from the future? How do I want my future to be? Everything was just, set. Everybody that was there was there. My friends were there. My family was there. My shit was there. My trauma was there. Everything was just there. And it had become part of this routine that had become my life. Never for one moment had I stopped and even fathomed what would my life be without any of these players, any of these people, any of these friends and family members, irrespective of how shit they were. Never did I stop for a moment and even consider the fact of how my life would be if any of these people weren't in my life. Okay, and then it happens. This existential anxiety, this deep, dark depression that it can cause in us has an immense impact when it comes to meaning. And what is the meaning of all of this? What is the meaning of my life? If this is how everything is going to work out, how can there be a thing such as purpose? If I'm going to end up pushing up daisies, then why the fuck am I doing any of this anyway? These are really good questions. The short answer is that purpose is not something we find. Purpose of life is to create purpose. This is what I have figured out so far. But if we search for it through other people or even through our own experiences, but if we search for a purpose, then we run the risk of experiencing something called destination fatigue. And what it means basically is I focus so much on just the destination that I miss the whole journey. And life is really about the journey of all of these different experiences and feelings and emotions and being alive. And the fact that we can actually feel all of these things, irrespective of how horrible it actually is. Just remember, the fact that we can experience these things means we have the capacity to process them as well. Because if we didn't have the capacity to feel it or experience it, then it would not exist for us. There's two different kinds of grief. Grief, in its essence, is a very natural process. Okay, because it's the loss of something. It's a constant that has been a part of our life for X amounts of time that we have become used to. It's intrinsically linked with how we see ourselves, our own self-view, our own self-value, and more importantly, the picture that we have of the future. When somebody close to us passes away, there's a disconnect. It's a part of this version that I have of myself and of life that dies. Okay, and that's a tragic thing. In certain cultures, People still grieve for a year. It's a process set in stone. In other cultures, Ireland for instance, somebody passes away and there is literally, it is a week-long event. So grief historically has always been identified as a natural disconnect, both celebration of life and then thereafter this experience of all of the associated emotions that comes with it. Now this is the healthy experience and processing of grief. Feeling the grief, letting it come through you, experiencing those feelings, but not letting it attach to you. Which brings us to the unhealthy impacts of grief. Now it's even difficult to say the unhealthy impacts of grief, right? Especially if you've lost a child or a parent or a partner or anybody very close to you. Unhealthy in a sense of it doesn't let us go. Unhealthy in a sense of I don't see a future anymore. Unhealthy in a sense of the pain is so much that it constantly overwhelms my body. So I lose this ability to process information in the real time, which means I don't experience joy, happiness, laughter, bliss, nothing like this. There's just a constant sadness inside of me that holds me on to the past constantly. Everything I think of and everything I see has some association with this individual that I miss so much. Maybe I regret some of the shit I did or I didn't do, and this is what's holding me onto this grief. But in that sense, grief can really, really destroy us. It can completely take us out of the present moment and keep us trapped in a body in the past. Very, very difficult. How do we process this? How do we get through this or beyond this? I like to use the words integrate because we never really get over something. Through it as well. In order to get through something, we need perspective. Okay, so there's a certain proximity of time necessary in order to be able to say, yes, I got through it. But if you're stuck in the middle of something like grief, you can't explain to someone, yeah, you'll get through this. One day is going to be different. No, because that fucking hurts. It hurts so much that it takes the oxygen out of your lungs. A tough experience. Integrating means learning how to experience whatever high intensity emotional sensations might still be stuck in our nervous system. The thing with grief is trauma. It's exactly the same dynamic that's happening. A very high intensity emotional experience that basically our cognitive capacity is unable to process it. Now, for anything that we experience physically that your mind is not able to process, it means it can't integrate it, all right? So it cannot equilibrate and it cannot bring it into a homeostasis and it cannot leave it as a coherent experience, which means this feeling that you experience, this high intensity, that bad boy stays in your body. And because it could not be integrated, what happens now is your mind comes up with adaptive mechanisms in order to become hypervigilant, right? It says, okay, Marcel, I'm going to protect you from experiencing this incredible pain again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to become super aware of absolutely anything that might just look like it's going to hurt you so that you're going to re-experience this feeling. Now, of course, in the beginning, this is a very clear self-protection mechanism. Problem is, in the long run, it's not so much self-protective anymore. It would rather be classified as self-destroying, very corrosive behavior. So why do we become afraid of experiencing these feelings? Why is it so hard to feel loss and grief? There's a couple of reasons. Mainly because it fucking hurts. Straightforward. Just like that. It hurts. What is the number one thing that a human being is designed to avoid? Pain. So this is a design. We're designed to avoid pain. It's not natural for us to actually move towards pain at all. Problem with the process like grief, as well as high impact, very emotional, abuse, neglect or rejection trauma, we get used to moving away from it, which means all of these feelings, they get trapped inside of our body. Now, part of the process of actually integrating these feelings means we need to figure out a way of going towards these feelings that we've been hiding from for such a very long time. This is where the mind really starts to manipulate us, depending on the kind of person we are and depending on whom we're surrounded with, depending on our religious circumstance surrounding upbringing, conditioning. We might not want to process these feelings. A part of us might think that we deserve this pain because we weren't good enough, or we shouldn't have done this, or we should have done that, because of regret. Regret can turn into an internal feeling that makes us feel we deserve this pain. You don't deserve this pain. You don't. Another side of it as well is we might think that if I let go of all of these feelings and I don't feel these feelings anymore, then I'm going to lose the memory of this person. Our pain can also help us to feel close to the people we've lost. Okay, because remember the human experience is really, it's about experiencing feelings through your body. And if we experience intense grief and pain and darkness when we think about someone we cared for dearly who is not with us anymore, that's still a feeling. Even if that feeling can be highly destructive, we can still manage to find comfort in it. The real question becomes, when does it become destructive? Once it becomes destructive and it starts to involuntarily interfere with our day-to-day life, our psychological health, our physical health, our work, our relationships, then it becomes a problem. Now, once again, this is not an easy thing. All right, if all the trauma experiences that I have come across, both in my personal life as well as professionally, loss of a loved one is perhaps one of the most powerful ones. It forces us to think about mortality. It forces us to feel. We can't avoid it. It forces us to think about the future. It forces us to remember the past, all of the bad things that we regret about the past. Loss and grief has no mercy. It's an emotion that absolutely doesn't give a shit about us. It takes you like this by the hands and it says, okay, now you're going to feel this. This is really how strong it is. What do we do about this? Well, there are a handful of things that we can do about them. Mainly, the awareness needs to be cultivated that I am afraid of something. 9 times out of 10, it is the re-experiencing of this hurts and this feeling, right? That this grief and this loss is actually clouding and enveloping and blanketing around me. So we become afraid of the memory of re-experiencing a certain feeling. This is a crucial part, which means we're going to avoid feeling the actual feeling, and the main trigger then becomes the memory that reminds you, oh yeah, no, you can't do that, you can't think of that, no, you can't do this, because if you do, then you're going to feel like that again. Okay, this is mainly your memory in play. How do we feel these things? There's no easy way to do that. Okay, there's no easy way to do that. There are certain breathing mechanisms, breathing techniques that I will show you going forwards, right? That helps for immediate release. Stuff like the Wim Hof method really, really works. Box breathing really, really works. Holotropic breathing, beautiful. But make sure that you do it in a guided environment with someone who knows what they're doing. Another breathing method that I like as well is nitric oxide breathing. It's box breathing in essence, but the difference is when you exhale, you just hum. So you exhale and you go, I'll do some breathing exercise videos with you guys. These are really crisis management techniques to calm down immediately when we're in a panic or an anxious state. So the very first step in order to start processing any of these really high intensity emotions is to find a way to calm our bodies down. Okay, because if your body doesn't feel safe, and if your body exists in a state of fear, your mind will not work. Right? There's no way your mind is going to work, because your mind is just going, my body is not safe. How do I protect it? How do I get away from this? So the first and foremost, the priority is always the body. After the body has become safe and it feels a bit regulated and calm, then there are some cognitive strategies that we can use. Psychotherapy is a very good modality. From a cognitive point of view, once the nervous system has been regulated and your body feels relatively safe and non-reactive, this is the important part, non-reactive, then we can really start to look at why, the meaning, the semantics of why is it so difficult for me to process this particular feeling. In my experience, the answer 9 times out of 10 has to do with our past. Either something we still haven't processed, that we went through in our own life, something we did that we deeply regret, something we didn't do that we deeply regret, which is often harder. It's the things that we didn't do. Sometimes it's the fact that we just can't see a life without these people, which I come across a lot. We just can't see a life without these precious, precious people that we lost. This is not an easy process. Okay, but it can be done. It can be done. It's a slow process. You have to be very gentle, patient. I like a modality that I designed through lifespan psychology. In effect, throughout our whole life, we go through developmental changes, both physically and psychologically. Depending on when we experience the traumas during some of these developmental stages, it basically causes a freeze in our emotional and our intellect developments. Primary stages of development, if we look at them as a sequential growth. Initially, it's the most primitive parts of your brain, your basal ganglia. These are the parts that keep you safe physically. Your heartbeats, your circulatory system, your breathing, your digestive system, your bowels, your bladder, stuff like that. As we start to hit teenage years, from 9, 10, 11, 12, around about there, our limbic system really starts to develop. Our limbic system primarily is responsible for our emotional regulation and for memory storage, both short-term and long-term. After that, really, it's the prefrontal cortex that comes into play, all of the higher executive thinking. So if we experience trauma during any three of these pivotal stages, it will have a long-term effect on us. Example, like for me, when my friend passed away when I was 17, I was really deep in my limbic system, my emotional development stages of my brain then. So it had a tremendous knock on me, right? And it basically caused the parts of my emotional development to freeze in time, right? And I'm still dealing with that. I'm still dealing and learning how to process my emotions when they come up, how to deal with my own triggers when they come up. This is not a process that ends. This is a journey that we start and it continues. It doesn't stop, right? And this is part of the issue with grief specifically. I come across many people who think that, okay, yeah, I don't want to feel like this. I don't know what's going on. There has to be a quick fix. Okay? There has to be a quick fix. I go to the doctor and I get some tablets, or I go to therapy, or I find a trauma coach, and, there has to be a quick fix. There is no quick fix for trauma. There just isn't. It's a process that once you complete the one process, you go into a bigger process. Once you complete the bigger process, you go into even a bigger process. So if you're under the impression that you will just do something once and this will be behind you, that is just another adaptive trauma mechanism that developed. It's another pattern that you're in. And so please be aware of that. The whole idea of all of this, being a human being, is to find that balance between being able to experience our emotions as our nervous system perceives it, so that our mind doesn't freak out and goes, what's happening? So that our mind can translate this information and categorize it in this amazing library that we have access to, so that we can continue being alive with all of these experiences, the hard ones and the beautiful ones. If you're struggling with this, reach out to me. You don't have to suffer alone. Send me a private message or leave me a comment. Grief is something that everybody goes through at one stage or another. It shouldn't be compared. You know that saying, whether you drown in an ocean full of water or you trip, you hit your head and you drown in this much water, you still drown. Doesn't matter how much water there was. Grief works exactly the same. Unprocessed trauma works exactly the same. The problem with this is we don't talk about it. We don't share our feelings because mainly we think that nobody would understand. Partially that is true. Okay, if somebody doesn't have the experience or the training or the education or a combination of these three things, then they might not understand. If somebody is in their own bubble, dealing with their own unprocessed life experiences and trauma memories, then they won't have the space to listen to when you do speak. So the trick becomes to really initially just get it out of you, whether you journal or you write or you make videos or voice recordings for yourself, or you go for long walks and you just start talking to yourself. This is the first stage. Talk. Talk. Talk about this. Because if we don't talk about this, I can promise you that it will stay inside of you. And just like a pool of stagnant water, these emotions over the long term, they become toxic. Grief can make us bitter and angry. Being angry at a person is one thing, but being angry at life is something completely different. Take care.